So we're recording?
I believe it's us.
It is, yes.
Okay, do you want to time it? Yep, you want.
Okay.
Time's on.
Okay. So our scene is from, our excerpt is from scene 2. It is from line 101 to 129. And it is right after Gloucester's finished reading the letter that was forged by Edmund. And according to this letter, Edmund is plotting to kill Gloucester in order to inherit all of his riches. And this scene is important because it marks Edmund's first lie, on which all of the subsequent ones are built. It's also the beginning of the second plot line. The second story in the history of King Lear. The first one was with King Lear and his 3 daughters, and the second one is Gloucester and his 2 sons. And Gloucester asks Edmund to go and seek his brother. But at the same time, he's also blaming the late eclipses in the sun and the stars for his son's betrayal. Later, Edmund reveals that Gloucester is actually the reason for his betrayal, and this is what Diego that we're going to analyze.
So like Emmy said, an important element in this excerpt is the fact that Gloucester blames Edgar's betrayal with Mother Nature. Basically, he says that his son had betrayed him because of the sun, the eclipses, and the moon. He even says that because of Mother Nature, and I quote, "Love cools, friendships fall off, brothers divide, in cities mutinies, in countries discords, palaces treason, the bond cracked between son and father." So he's basically justifying every man's misfortune by justifying it with nature. This build-up demonstrates 2 things. First, how ludicrous Gloucester is to have this belief, and secondly, that he does not hold accountable, including himself, any man for his flaws or his actions.
And also Edmund actually mocks this belief. He calls it the excellent foppery of the world. So excellent as in great and amazing, and foppery as in foolishness. So he's saying that is something that is great and foolish. So this is an oxymoron. Is kind of opposing 2 concepts that should not be associated. And so this oxymoron kind of shows how sarcastic Edmund is throughout his whole monologue that follows his. Yeah. Further, even more than mocking him, he also blames Gloucester for his denial, how he's denying his responsibility in his betrayal, being betrayed. So Edmund says that we blame our misfortunes on, as if we were fools by necessity. So we do things as if we were fools by necessity, and adulterers by an obedience of planetary influence. So basically what he's saying is that, he's kind of mimicking his father's life, because he's an adulterer. Edmund is an illegitimate child, so he's blaming the fact that Gloucester is denying the fact that he was responsible for Edmund's birth, and Edmund is really bitter about that, and that's what it shows. And lastly, he's also bitter, and it is shown when he actually says literally that Gloucester is responsible for his own betrayal. So Edmund says, "When we are seeking fortune, often the surfeit of our own behavior, we may be guilty of our disasters, the sun, the moon, and the stars." So this he's insinuating here in that often the surfeit of our own behavior, saying that often the result of our actions. That's why we have bad things happen to us. That's why we have bad luck. He's insinuating that Gloucester brought it upon himself. He is the reason for being betrayed.
There are also numerous themes in this excerpt that we observe that are also present throughout the novel. The play. So the first theme would be betrayal. obviously, because Edmund in this excerpt not only betrays his father, but betrays his own brother. You also have the theme of blindness, because you have, on one hand, Gloucester, who quickly jumps to the conclusion that this letter is real, and that his son, his most loved son, his most loyal son, is the author of this letter. Finally, a theme that's super important is also validation. We notice that through this excerpt that one of Edmund's motives is really just to be recognized and validated, and this is one of the motives, like I said, behind his betrayal. We can also make a parallel between these themes and those that are in the first plot line, between King Lear and his daughters. If we take the theme of betrayal, which is the first one I mentioned, in both plot lines, these are children who are manipulating their fathers and their trust. If we take the theme of blindness, which is the second theme I mentioned, both men have lost their reason and their authority is crumbling into pieces, and it prevents them from seeing their children's real motives, and for banishing, obviously, their kids that prove to be loyal in the end. And finally, we can also make a parallel with thirst for social recognition and validation, because in our opinion, one of the reasons why Regan and Goneril actually betray their father is because they have this kind of void because of their father's indifference to them. Okay, in conclusion.
No, there's a minute and a half left. I forgot to put my hand
Okay.
up, sorry.
It's fine, okay. So in conclusion, Edmund mocks those who blame their misfortunes on others, on destiny, on the stars, basically anything but themselves. He also blames those who can't held themselves accountable for all the negative impacts that their actions cause on those surrounding them. Lastly, this passage also shed light on Edmund's motives. At first, we can see that maybe his motives are just of material origin, like power and riches. But as we go through the excerpt, we understand that there's this this underlying sadness and this need for validation, and it's just a combination of sibling rivalry, validation, a father that never really loved him entirely. So we understand that there are numerous factors that explain Edmund's betrayal in the end.
Okay? Kovita,
It's you and Gillian next.
So our excerpt was in the scene 7. It takes place after Goneril gives Lear an ultimatum, which he takes offense from and leaves. He then turns to Regan for shelter, but the two sisters had already made a scheme involving the servants to rob him of all his power. At this point, Lear starts to lose his mind and tries to keep his dignity by refusing to ply to the offers. After this mind-breaking moment, Lear has many realizations regarding the daughters. Following this excerpt, Lear's raging madness is figuratively and literally represented by a storm.
This excerpt presents a plotted ambush. It's planned by Lear's two daughters, Goneril and Regan. And the goal of this trap is for the girls to obtain Lear's current power by forcing him to get rid of his servants. The girls are aware that Lear's servants are the only power that he has left, which is why they use this path to get to him. In turn, Lear feels ambushed and betrayed by his daughter's scheme to get to his power. Also, the two daughters put emphasis on the lowering of the number of servants in order to dissimulate their true intentions, which are to diminish the king's power.
First of all, the king feels ambushed and betrayed by his daughter's scheme to get to his power. Indeed, this ambush consisted of the daughters verbally attacking the king, which left him powerless.
Firstly, the daughters' tactic to get to the power is to extinguish Lear's voice. In order to do so, they use the interrogative form as well as rhetorical questions. For example, from the lines 397 to 399, Regan says, "How in a house should many people under two commands hold amity?" And at lines 400 to 401, Goneril says, Why might not you, my lord, receive attendance from those that she calls servants or from mine? These rhetorical questions are used to shut Lear down.
They make the audience see at what point the daughters are in control of the situation. This is the moment where we really begin to pity Lear. Before this point, the audience perceived the king as an egocentric and heartless man, especially because of the way he treated Cordelia by disowning her.
Another example in which the girls verbally attack Lear is when Regan says at line 413, "And speak it again, my lord, no more with me." These phrases demonstrate the authority that Regan now has on her father.
The audience understands that the roles have now changed since the first scene of the play, and it's now the daughters who are the ones in control of Lear's future.
Secondly, the king is intimidated and deeply affected by the situation, leaving him powerless in front of his daughters. He doesn't comprehend the reasons behind his daughter's betrayal. Also at line 407, he uses a metaphorical phrase to express his disappointment. "I gave you all."
The metaphor consists of amplifying what he gave his daughters during their lifetimes to the extent of all of his possessions. This once again contributes to the sadness and pity that the audience feel for Lear. It even gives us the impression that Lear was a good father who cared for his daughters.
Another example of the severity of his wounds is when Lear compares his life to the life of an animal at line 425, when he says, "Man's life is cheap as beasts." We understand that he is so deeply affected and hurt that he diminishes his integrity to the one of an animal. This increases the audience's pity for Lear as we start to feel defensive for him.
The last example of Lear's powerlessness is at the lines 417 and 418, when he says, "Thy 50 yet doth double 5 and 20, and thou art twice her love." Here, Lear feels so desperate that he has to quantify his daughter's love by the number of servants, which indirectly equivalents to the amount of power that the daughters will allow him to keep.
At this point, we see that his misery is making him think without logic. Once again, the audience only feels pity and compassion for Lear. Second of all, the two daughters put emphasis on the lowering of the number of servants in order to dissimulate their true intentions, which are to diminish the king's power.
Firstly, the daughters use the fight over the servant as a facade to mask their desire for power. Indeed, the ultimate goal of the scheme is to take over all of Lear's power. We can see this at the lines 400 and 401, when Goneril says, "Why might not you, my lord, receive attendance from those that she calls servants, or from mine?"
In this question, Goneril is indirectly referring to Lear's power when she speaks of servants. Indeed, she's insinuating that Lear should be under her or her sister's power instead of having his own. This makes the audience resent the daughters because of their masked need for power.
Also, the fact that they made their point through questions contributes to the brainwashing and manipulation of Lear. We could even say that their facade is amplified by intimidation through the intense questioning.
Another example that illustrates their facade is when Regan says, "What needs one?" at line 421. Here she's referring to the number of servants that Lear needs. In fact, she's subtly saying that Lear doesn't need any power at all. This makes the audience feel like the daughters are ungrateful and undeserving, as they do not recognize the value that Lear attributes to his servants.
This is the moment where not only the audience realizes this, but also Lear, who finally understands and caught on with the scheme and understands that the servants have been figuratively hiding what the daughters wanted all along, which is the power.
Secondly, as we just mentioned, Lear realizes their true motives and the figurative importance of his servants, which in turn angers him and reminds him of his worth. As a matter of fact, we can observe this anger in his realization that he has at line 422, when he says, "Oh, reason, not the need."
In this line, he is justifying himself by expressing the fact that his need for servant is not just a simple practical need, but rather a sign of nobility. This nonverbal exclamation truly allows the audience to understand that Lear is now aware of what is going on.
Another example is at line 440, when Lear says, "The terrors of the earth." This metaphor illustrates the extent of the king's desire for revenge on his two daughters. Indeed, now that he is aware of the scheme, he doesn't let his daughters manipulate him any further, and he stands his ground.
This makes the audience feel relieved and as if everything was going to return to how it should be, meaning that the king would be in control of the whole kingdom and that the daughters would be demoted.
A final example in which Lear realizes his self-worth is at the lines 440 and 441, when he says, "You think I'll weep. No, I'll not weep." In these sentences, Lear affirms his strength and authority before his daughters. He is now aware that his daughters want to hurt him, and he refuses to give them the satisfaction that they would get by destroying him.
This leaves the audience confident in Lear and builds up hope for his success and restoration of power and kingdom. However, it is actually giving us false hope, as the complete opposite is going to happen. Lear will go mad, lose all his power and dignity, and eventually die.
In conclusion, this excerpt presents a plotted ambush. As we saw, Lear feels ambushed and betrayed by his daughter's scheme to get to his power. Also, the two daughters put emphasis on the lowering of the number of servants in order to dissimulate their true intentions, which are to diminish the king's power.
In short, we believe that this scene was a pivotal moment in the play, as it is the turning point for Lear's mental health. As a matter of fact, this excerpt will determine what will happen in the rest of the play.
Great. Thomas and Babish.
So the excerpt we're analyzing is the 7th scene of the 3rd act, and it's the scene in which Regan and the Duke of Cornwall blind Gloucester. It's one of the most violent and shocking acts performed in Shakespeare's plays, and spectators have even been reported to faint during this scene. Gloucester's metaphorical refusal to see the king wronged results in quite literal blinding. So, on line 65, Cornwall replies to Gloucester, "Seat thou, shalt thou never," which is a reply to Gloucester's refusal to see the king wronged, and proceeds to gouge out Gloucester's eyes and then to stomp on, well, one of his eyes and stomp on it. And the language itself is very stark in this scene and brutal, and it easily inspires revulsion. When Cornwall says, "Out, vile jelly, where is thy luster now?" it can outrage the audience at the sheer cruelty of Cornwall's actions. There's a parallel with another of Shakespeare's plays, which is Titus Andronicus, as Gloucester's blinding can be put next to the rape and mutilation of Lavinia, and these characters come to embody the violence committed upon them. For those who don't know what happens to Lavinia in that play, she's raped in a ditch, and then her tongue is cut out, and her hands are cut off, so she can never tell anyone who raped her. And then ultimately she will use a stick in her mouth to write it in the dirt. There's also the gouging of the eyes presents an interesting biblical parallel as well with the lex talionis, which is the law of the talion. And I quote, "As he has done, so it shall be done to him, eye for eye, tooth for tooth," which is from the book of Leviticus 24, 19 to 21. So at a first glance, if that is an idea of justice, this scene would seem to be a corruption of justice, as an innocent man is harmed for being righteous. But a deeper analysis reveals that the question of justice in the scene is much more complex. Because Gloucester is punished for remaining loyal to a king who has abdicated his rule, and who has divided his kingdom, which is a very questionable political decision. So Lear's initial decision, his lack of foresight, his metaphorical blindness, is at least partially the cause of Gloucester's physical blindness. And then it also leads us to pose ourselves the question, has Gloucester himself done anything to deserve such punishment? In the light of the law of the talion. Blinding has been historically socially accepted punishment for rape, as lust is inspired by sight, in the same way that a thief will be punished by losing a hand, as his hand allowed him to commit theft. So Gloucester has committed adultery by fathering Edmund, and has thus fallen prey to one of the 7 cardinal sins, lust. So during this scene where his eyes are gouged out, the connection between adultery and blinding is implicit. But however, I'm just going to make a connection. In Act 5, Scene 3, Edgar finally explicitly makes the connection between these two events. He says, "The gods are just, and of our pleasant vices make instruments to plague us. The dark and vicious place where he got cost him his eyes." So he clearly establishes a connection between the events of Gloucester's blinding and then the fathering of Edmund. Gloucester's exclamation after his first eye is gouged out, "O cruel, O you gods," is not actually an appeal to the mercy of the gods, in my opinion, but rather a statement of the cruelty of the aforementioned gods. He makes this clear in the next scene where he says, "As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for our sport."
So indeed, as my partner brought up, this scene is perhaps the most evident opposite of poetic justice, that this idea of a moral resolution to anything and that's construed in place. So, and I'd like to examine this idea further by looking at the idea of pain and how it's almost absurd in a sense. For example, let's look at the idea of a plucking of a beard. The full and trimmed beard is a Judeo-Christian symbol of manhood, while the whiteness of the beard is symbolic of the character's wisdom and age. And so Regan's plucking is thus considered a supreme insult, and in a sense it represents a double injury that's being caused to this character who's absolutely done nothing to deserve such a treatment. And so in the face of this, we must consider the idea of the servants. So the servants are perhaps the most virtuous of characters. It's the servants, the poor folk, who are really the moral heroes of this scene. In fact, it raises another one of the themes plays, which is the idea of lineage and how bloodlines tie into one's virtuousness and one's righteousness. And so it raises the idea of this blood sanction legitimacy in whether it be through royalty or just in moral actions as a whole. And so from a point of view of power relations and of class, in this scene, there's sort of an interesting divide because it's the servants, the ones who are expected to tacitly obey their masters, that are the ones that are really revolting, and that's expressed notably by the gentleman who engaged in combat with Cornwall. And so, to expand on this idea, in throwing Gloucester out of his own house, Cornwall and Regan are not only violating the laws of hospitality that were prevalent at the time, but in the process continue to use their authority to disarrange the usual order of the kingdom. And so, it's odd because the servants still understand what's right and just, and they choose to help their former lord, as Thomas raised, which is to say an abdicated king, and what seems to be righteous in the larger scale, in the larger scheme of things, rather than their real masters, if we might say so. And so, when we come to the act of blinding itself, it's a rather, as Thomas said, it's a rather brutal scene, but blinded, Gloucester calls out to Edmund for help, and I quote, he says, "Enkindle all sparks of nature to quit this horrid act," at the lines on 105 and 6. And then Regan informs Gloucester that Edmund hates him, that it was Edmund himself who betrayed his father, and devastated Gloucester naturally realizes that he was misled in regarding Edgar, and he calls upon the gods to forgive him and help Edgar prosper. So if we examine this idea of blindness, Gloucester's blinding in the play makes literal his emotional blindness towards his two sons, Edgar and Edmund. It's only when he really does become blind that he realizes that he actually gains real or true insight into who his children really are, and which of them actually loves them. This makes Gloucester a foil for both Lear, personally and politically. Gloucester and Lear both reject the child who loves them the most in favor of a child, or in the case of Lear, the children who suck up to them, if we may say so. And so, metaphorically, both Gloucester and Lear are both blind to their respective good children, and which is to say Edgar and Cordelia, and they fall victim to the wickedness of their, evil children. And so, his call to the gods to let Edgar prosper reflects his residual belief that the heavens are capable of guarding his order and justice, which is something that I differ on in opinion with Thomas. I think that there's still virtuousness in what Gloucester's line of belief is. And so, I'd finally like to raise an alternate point of view, which is that of the people that are inflicting this punishment on Gloucester, in particular the idea of the character of Goneril. Towards the end, the servants do raise the point of the rather terrible nature of this by raising the idea that women will all turn to monsters. This is a contextual appropriate on women first, and it helps characterize the idea of Goneril that's being raised by Shakespeare in the play. Indeed, Goneril's sole claim to the throne is the idea that she may influence or bear an heir to the throne. And so, in that sense, her taking on of justice by whether it be through political machinations or in this scene by egging on her husband to gouge out the eyes of Gloucester, that effectively reflects this negative portrayal of what a woman should be doing and what a women ruler should be. And it reflects the Notchian perspective on what women in power were at the time. And so, in a larger scale, there's obviously a perversity at play, not only in this scene, but within the kingdom itself. It's reflected by the moral actions of the characters. And so, it raises the idea of an absurd pain, of an unjust pain, and something that transcends the paradigm of lex talionis that was raised by Thomas. And in a sense, this scene is the moral equivalent of a shocker. Much like Titus Andronicus, the violence here is gratuitous and effectively serves no real purpose if not the shock. Thank you.
Okay. Philip and Christiana.
So our excerpt is situated in scene 21, which is the last scene of Act 4. So it is about the doctor who is taking care of King Lear, who informs Cordelia that her father is about to wake up. Eventually, when he opens his eyes, he thinks that he is dead and surrounded by spirits. At first, he doesn't recognize his daughter, but slowly he will come to his senses. Both characters will forgive each other, but Lear realizes that he has done more harm to his daughter than she has ever done to him. In this excerpt, the king finally finds catharsis after being in an extreme state of misery. Indeed, he was poorly treated by both his daughters, and he wished to be dead. He is guilty for banishing and disowning Cordelia. However, in spite of all this misery, he will manage to regain his vital force when he reconciles with Cordelia.
The king is in a suicidal state, which is corollary of all the terrible events he has gone through. His psychopathic daughters have treated him like an animal, and he has suffered. Cordelia notices his poor condition and pities him. She can't believe how cruel her sisters are and says the following words at line 34 to 37. Mine's injurious meanest dog, though he had bit me, should have stood that night against my fire, and wast thou fain, poor father, to hovel thee with swine. This passage refers to the incident when where he had to stay outside during the storm. It consists of a hypothesis that describes a realistic scene to illustrate her perspective on the matter. It reveals that she has a minimum of compassion to shelter the enemy's dog, even if it has bitten her. Therefore, Cordelia is criticizing her sisters, describing them as being inhuman because they can't even express the slightest act of human decency towards their own father, while she herself is prepared to do it for a dog. Moreover, the use of the word swine suggests that he has been treated poorly and had to sleep in harsh conditions. Cordelia is therefore frustrated because her sisters brutalized their father and lowered him to the same level of a pig. Not only is Lear in misery because of his evil daughters, but he is also psychologically scarred because he realized he mistreated Cordelia and can't forgive himself for it. In fact, he clearly states at line 43, "You do me wrong to take me out of the grave." This metaphor indicates that he felt dead and he didn't want to be awakened. Lear thought that he didn't deserve to live. Moreover, to emphasize his guilt, he pronounces these following words right after. "I am bound upon the wheel of fire that mine own tears scald like molten lead." The wheel of fire is a metaphor used to describe hell. Indeed, he was in a hellish situation, and his tears are pictured as strips of lava. His sufferings are therefore compared to burning metal, and it illustrates what he feels inside. Cordelia's banishment indirectly resulted in him being rejected by both Goneril and Regan, and thinking that Cordelia could not stand the sight of him. It's a parent's worst nightmare to realize that your own children are turning their backs against you, and that's why he's suffering inside, and the image of burning lead illustrates his extreme state of sadness. Furthermore, after he realizes that he is in fact alive, he immediately wants to return to his grave. Lear totally lost the will to live because, again, he knows he brought pain to Cordelia by banishing her. In fact, he says the following verses at line 69 to 72, "If ye have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me, for your sisters have, I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause, they have not." The juxtaposition of the sentences creates an effect of contrast between the personalities of Cordelia, Goneril, and Regan. The punctuation marks separate the two extremes, the evil sisters on one side and the good-hearted angel on the other. The king is extremely guilty and is prepared to pay for his actions, so he finally recognizes that Cordelia is pure-hearted and that he has been manipulated by his two other daughters. And that is why he gives Cordelia the right to hate him. He is ashamed that he blindly believed Goneril's and Regan's disingenuous love. He is remorseful and would rather not live because he thinks that Cordelia resents him for what he has done. And this particular situation mirrors what Gloucester feels when he is about to jump from Dover's cliff. He also is ashamed of himself because he mistreated Edgar and blindly believed all of Edmund's lies. In that sense, these two characters are alike. And the emotive language present in all four passages help accentuate Lear's misery since he realizes that all the trouble that has happened is indirectly of his doing.
In spite of all the despair and grief, Lear's reconciliation with his daughter will undergo an emotional catharsis. Even though he believes that he belongs in hell, he still sees the light at the end of the tunnel. Upon his awakening, he says, "Thou art a soul in bliss." This is a metaphor that illustrates Cordelia as an angel who is here to save him from his demise. there seems to be no barrier between heaven and hell, which means that Cordelia is in front of him. Even though at first Lear doesn't recognize his own daughter, subconsciously he sees something pure, like an aura of hope. Moreover, Cordelia explicitly forgives him out of love and put everything that has occurred in the first act in the past. And she says, no cause, no cause. The repetition of no cause emphasizes the forgiveness. She says that she still loves him and does not hate him for banishing her in the beginning. The heavenly environment is also very important because it has a biblical meaning. Cordelia is compared to Christ, and this is because forgiveness is one of the most important values for Christians. It is the most virtuous act. Upon their reconciliation, Lear will realize how foolish he was, but he is also very happy to have his daughter back. To conclude, the excerpt puts emphasis on Lear's realization of who he mistreated and who he misjudged at the beginning of the play. He's suffering knowing that he disowned his most loving daughter and he was abused by his flatterers. In this misery, King Lear will wish he was dead rather than face Cordelia, his perfect daughter. He's conscious of all the pain that he has caused to her, but the reconciliation and her forgiveness will help him overcome his sadness.
You just started.
Yeah, go ahead.
So our extract is at scene 5, act 3, from line 120 to 170. So we know that before this extract, Goneril poisons Regan, and her sister eventually dies because of her. And that Edgar gave Albany a letter stating that Goneril is plotting against her husband, to kill him. And so Albany decides to challenge Edmund to a duel. Edgar then appears as the champion who will fight in the name of Albany. And so this is where our extract starts. This passage is situated at the end of the play, and we can witness the duel between Edgar and Edmund, as well as the aftermath. So our question for this extract is, can we say that Shakespeare shows the audience that characters who sin reap what they sow? So we divide our answer according to the characters. So for one part, Edmund and Edgar, for the other, Goneril and Gloucester. So I'll start by analyzing the duel between the two brothers. First of all, we all know that Edmund sinned throughout the play. Edgar's monologue proves this to be enumeration of line 131, and he says, "You are a traitor, false to the gods, the brother, the father, conspiring against this high illustrious prince." So Edmund manipulated and betrayed everyone, including his father, his brother, King Lear's daughters, and many other characters. Secondly, Edgar compared his brother with a form of animal imagery. At line 135, it says, "A most toad-spotted traitor." So Edmund is compared to a poisonous toad because he's like a poison to other people's lives in the play. For example, when he manipulates Goneril and Regan by making them believe that he was in love with them, it eventually leads to Regan's poisoning. So it comes back to the animal imagery. So we can surely admit that Edmund and Edgar are the total opposite. Edgar is noble and honorable, whereas Edmund is the symbol of vice. So when Edgar finally defeats his brother, we can say that there's a sense of poetic justice in this scene. Edgar has suffered enough because of Edmund's little games, and then he can finally confronts his brother in this duel and kill him. So Edgar represents here the consequences of Edmund's actions. Plus, we can also say that the duel between Edgar and Edmund is like a duel between good and evil, where Edmund's defeat symbolizes the triumph of virtue over vice. Finally, I can conclude by saying that Shakespeare represents a form of poetic justice, which is a recurrent theme throughout the play. And he's doing that with the relationship of the brothers.
So,
So another character who reaps what she sowed is Goneril. And in the play, we notice that she is one of the most devious characters in King Lear, and this is brought to light by Albany when he says, "Thou worse than anything," at line 152. So by this, now, however, Goneril doesn't seem to really care about her husband consulting her, because just after this, she answers line 154, "Say if I do, the laws are mine, not thine." So she's basically saying that she is the queen and that he is not going to be able to stop her from obtaining her throne. And after this, Albany confronts her about what is written in the letter, and we can see a change of personality in Goneril. Because after this, she answers, "Ask me not what I know." And there's two ways you can see that. There's her literal meaning and the figurative meaning. The literal meaning, which would be, "I will not tell you what I knew about Edmund's plan." But if we analyze the figurative meaning of this, which is far more relevant for this excerpt, is that, in a sense, she's saying that she understands what she has done, but she prefers not to think about it. But she contradicts herself by exiting the scene. And Albany, who says, "Go after her, she's desperate," is a foreshadow of that she's might do something rash, such as commit suicide. So we can say that she reaped what she sowed, because in the play she tricked her father Lear and also Regan, and now she got tricked by her husband Albany for when he asked her what was in the letter. So in a sense, once again, Shakespeare is bringing a poetic justice throughout the character of Goneril. Another character would be Gloucester, and him reaping what he sowed is brought to light by Edgar. He says in line 166, 167, "The gods are just, and our pleasant vices are instrument to scourge us." So what's he saying? That our sins will be punished. And of course, Gloucester's sin is that he fathered a bastard son. And just after this, Edgar says, "The dark and vicious place where he cost him his eyes." Well, the dark and vicious place is a simile for either a female genitalia or a brothel, where he succumbed to his pleasant vice of sexual intercourse. So by doing this, he was blinded of the consequences that he might have a bastard son out of it. So we see before this extract that he literally gets blinded by Cornwall. So he created the context in which he was blinded by his desires, and now he literally got blinded. But once again, he reaped what he sowed, and Shakespeare's inserting some poetic justice in his character. Finally, at the last verse of this extract, Edmund says, "The wheel has come full circle," and this is a perfect verse to end this excerpt, because the wheel is a simile for life, and it can be interpreted in two ways. If we look to it for the play as a whole, it can mean that the characters are punished for the event that they have set and trained, and we've showed this with the character of Goneril, Edmund, and Gloucester. But if we analyze this more only for Edmund, it can be like a wheel. He started from the bottom as being a bastard son. He slowly made his way up, almost getting as the ruler of the kingdom, before finally getting defeated by his brother. So he got back to where he was before. In conclusion, in this excerpt, the characters reap what they sowed. For example, Goneril, Gloucester, and Edmund, and Shakespeare seems to be inserting some poetic justice. However, if we finish the play, we notice that Cordelia also dies. So this destroys the argument that, in a sense, Shakespeare wanted to give a moral to the story and show that bad characters end up being punished, because she is one of the most virtuous characters, but the most virtuous character of the play, and she also ends up being punished.
Good. Very good. Everybody. 10 minutes. Ding!
I'm not doing a thing, I'm silent. Well,
Just-
not anymore.
we're
Just
just
asking
institution.
Ask one question or?
You, whatever.
Could I ask something?
Whatever happens, happens.
You can ask if you want, and you can.
I'll cover that.
Okay, we talked about poetic justice. I mean, I think everyone brought it up once. If I give you Regan and Goneril's death, do you actually believe that it's poetic justice, or were they just really victims of a father that never loved them enough and always loved their other sister more? So are they just victims of determinisms, or do they actually, in your opinion, deserve their deaths? That's my question.
I'm gonna say that I think they both deserve their death because even if you consider that King Lear was a bad father, it doesn't give them a reason to actually commit murder. I don't think you can justify murder, trickery, manipulation on the fact that your father never loved you. So by that I say they're completely responsible for their actions, and it's for Goneril, it's an eye for an eye. She killed Regan, and now she dies also with suicide. So I would say no.
They deserve.
Yeah, they deserve it.
Well, I might disagree with that, because I think that Shakespeare's commentary on justice is a bit more complex. He's not necessarily saying that characters will get what they deserve or what they don't deserve. As you can see, there's examples of characters who are unfairly punished, like Cordelia, and then there's characters who obviously were wronged. And I think the real message of the play is, it's not about destiny, it's not about what happened before, it's not the disposition of the stars, it's really about intentions. And I think that's what Shakespeare was trying to bring up in the play.
Would you say it's about intentions or more just about circumstances?
See, I would go and disagree with that. 'Cause I think that if you look, for example, at the character of someone like Edmund, there is no intention, like no matter how, his intention if you look at it from a pure objective point of view, it's not bad. He simply wants to transcend his condition of being born in an inferior state that effectively limits him to just being a bastard forever. And so, in that sense, I think that he's sort of circumscribed by circumstances, to say it a little repetitive, but he is circumscribed by whatever it is that he was born as. And I think that in that sense, there's this idea of an absurdity and there's almost nothing to do there, because I don't think that there's a question of right or wrong or does anybody deserve anything. Because if you look at the characters of Goneril and Regan, for example, we can't even talk about determinisms in this case because we don't even know any information about their mother, there's no contextual evidence about anything beyond, well, their actions. And so to say that there's right or wrong, I don't think that there's any morality at all in this play. I think it's more of a comment on human nature as a whole and how it's very unpredictable, chaotic, gratuitous, violent, and effectively doesn't really mean much in the end.
So it kind of mirrors what Hobbes said. So yeah, I felt like the characters and their intention and their action kind of reflects what the state of nature of Hobbes. So every human being is kind of greedy, is kind of driven by competition, jealousy. I think that throughout the play we can see at many instances that it occurs, and I kind of agree with Babish on this point. So Hobbes kind of says that with the kind of intrinsic nature, the greedy nature of human, it kind of leads to a state of chaos. So it kind of Shakespeare play kind of mirrors that philosophy a little bit.
But I believe that Shakespeare also believes, well, he doesn't believe that, but two characters in that play are actually not greedy and they're actually described as, there's like the evil and then there's the virtuous people, or a lot of not flawed people, but two virtuous characters that are Cordelia and Edgar, who were wronged. They were banished from the kingdom, and yet their greed, nothing stopped them from coming back to their fathers. So.
Maybe it's a criticism that is kind of, the evil kind of overcomes the bad. Because we see that even though Cordelia and Edgar are kind of the good characters, we can't really argue that the end is a happy ending. So it kind of tells us that the evil
Clearly not.
it kind of overcomes the goodness of the characters.
Well, I'd say that neither good nor evil really prevails.
Okay.
If you look at there's no winners, it's a tragedy. So I mean, both the people who have done evil are punished, and then even some characters that, like Cordelia, are equally punished. So it's more, I say it's a commentary on human nature like that is shed. It's not really that humans are inherently evil or good, it's just that humans come in all, colors and flavors, and that people are different, and that certain decisions will spawn chaos and conflict, but they will eventually be resolved, sometimes at the cost of many lives.
Do you believe this in life in general or in the book? Like, are you referring?
That's a statement that Shakespeare's saying.
Okay, so you're not talking about your own perception of.
No.
To go back to justice, I think that Shakespeare was trying to show how justice is in the real world, meaning that at the time people thought, people put divine justice above reason, so they always thought that evil would be punished and good would be rewarded, and he wanted to make the point that it's not necessarily like that in real life.
If we're going to talk about divine justice, I think it's very interesting that the gods in this play seem very remote, and in traditional Greek plays, the gods would intervene to help resolve the intrigue, and it would be Deus ex machina, which is when the gods come to help solve the whole situation. And that's completely absent from Shakespeare's plays, and he's really painting out a world where the gods no longer seem to intervene in human affairs, and it's really a world of men without gods.
I mean, as far as I agree, that there's definitely not an obvious ex machina ending or any resolution that's in an effective or bundled form. There is sort of a mystical element in a way. When you think of, for example, the fool in the story who makes this prophetic statement about everything that's to come, and this idea that's sort of presupposed in that there's chaos and something seems unruly in the kingdom, that there's this perverse thing that's happening and something that's completely out of the ordinary, and then that something needs to, you have this as a reader, I think, that as soon as you start reading the play or you're watching it, you know that there's something that must be done, and I think that ultimately it's not so much a tragedy that's without gods, but I think it's more of an idea of you're watching this play, and I think Shakespeare it's a little more complex than that. He plays on the deception of a traditional narrative. You expect things to get better, but they don't, and in the end, you're as a reader, as someone who's watching the play, whether it be Gloucester whose eyes get ripped out unjustly, or Cordelia who dies at the end, and you're effectively shocked by it. It's the idea of pain that prevails over anything else, and it's not so much the idea that. And I think it's more that there's pain, and that you will be surprised, and that life has its unexpected turns.
I know that Sana wanted to pipe in.
Okay, but on what you said, usually plays are like either like representation of reality or the best representation of reality you can get. I don't even know how to explain that, but I think Shakespeare all he wanted to do was like represent the world as it is. So every time the audience expects for something good to happen at the end, well, he's just stating like how society is, because in the end, like everyone, I don't even know how to explain my point, but
It comes back to the reap what you sow. Everybody gets the result of what they've done.
but not everybody, because Cordelia hasn't done anything and she dies anyway.
But
But Babish, I have a question. When you say traditional...
Hold on, Thomas, let's just let Gab in.
Yeah, well, I agree with what Sana said, and also, since this play is pretty much a tragedy, basically in tragedies, one of the key points is that there's catharsis. So when you read it, since, as we all said, like, there's no just good and bad, it's more like the human nature in general. Well, when we read it, we go through many emotions that in our lives we maybe wouldn't go through at such an extreme level. So when we read it, we feel as though we were purging ourselves from these extreme emotions, even though they're not necessarily like perfect emotions that we would want to feel as what would have happened if the ending would have been a perfect ending. So since it's just human nature and it's more random and not really the good gets good and the bad get the bad, it's more of a catharsis, so we go through, like I said, the extreme stream of emotions.
Okay, that was the bell, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.